My son sat at the reading of the will, a smug smile plastered across his face. He was convinced I'd get nothing from his mother's $34 million inheritance. But when the lawyer read one single sentence, everything changed. The smile vanished from Dustin's face, and he began screaming so loudly that the walls of the office shook. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering against the linoleum floor, as Mrs. Henderson's voice rose through the thin apartment wall. "Your damn sprinklers are flooding my begonias again, Jerry." I sighed, grabbed a dish towel, and knelt among the ceramic shards. 65 years old and still cleaning up messes that weren't entirely my fault. The sprinkler system I'd installed last month had one loose joint that sent water spraying into her garden every few days. I'd tried explaining the repair schedule, but patience was never Eleanor Henderson's strong suit. The phone rang. I ignored it, focusing on soaking up the spreading coffee puddle, but the ringing persisted, cutting through Eleanor's continued shouting about property values and inconsiderate tenants. On the fifth ring, I gave in. "Jerry Flores speaking." "Mr. Flores, this is Janet Morrison from Morrison, Welsh and Associates in Cheyenne," came a calm professional voice. That tone. I'd heard it before. The one people use right before giving you bad news. "I'm calling regarding Brianna Elizabeth Flores." My grip tightened on the receiver. No one had called Brianna by her full name in my presence for 15 years. "What about her?" I asked quietly. "Sir, I'm very sorry to inform you that Mrs. Flores passed away on Tuesday evening. The funeral service is scheduled for this Friday at 2 o'clock at Riverside Memorial Chapel." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into the kitchen chair, its familiar creak deafening in the silence that followed. Tuesday evening. That was 3 days ago. 3 days while I'd been worrying about sprinkler systems and coffee stains. "Mr. Flores, are you still there?" "Yes," I managed. "I'm here. How did you get my number?" "Your name was listed among Mrs. Flores's personal effects as an emergency contact." "I understand you were previously married?" "Previously married. 22 years reduced to 2 words." "Yes," I said. "We divorced in 2010. "I see. There will be a reading of the will following the service. You're named as a beneficiary, so your presence would be appreciated." Beneficiary. The word didn't make sense. Brianna had built her empire after our divorce, turning a small consulting firm into something that made headlines. What could she possibly have left me? "I'll be there," I said softly. After hanging up, I stayed in the chair, staring at the phone. The coffee stains on the floor were already setting, but I couldn't move. Couldn't process the simple fact that Brianna, vibrant, stubborn, impossible Brianna, was gone. The afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing like forgotten memories, and as I sat there, her name echoed in my mind. Brianna Elizabeth Flores, each syllable dragging me back through time. It was a snowy February evening in 1987. Murphy's Diner. That's where I first saw her. A woman in a red wool coat arguing with the manager. "You're telling me you won't consider female applicants for weekend manager because women can't handle the pressure?" she demanded. That's the most ridiculous thing I've heard all week. She was fire in human form, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, and a voice that made everyone listen. I sat frozen, mid-bite of apple pie, unable to look away. When she stormed out, the manager grumbled, "That one's trouble." I placed a $5 bill beside my half-eaten dessert and said quietly, "No, that one's extraordinary." Her business card sat on the counter. Brianna Chen, business consultant. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to call. When I finally did, she answered on the second ring. "Brianna Chen. Hi, this is Jerry Flores. You don't know me, but I saw you at Murphy's Diner on Friday night." "The man with the apple pie?" she teased. "You heard that?" "I heard everything," she laughed. "So, Jerry Flores, what can I do for you?" "Have dinner with me." "Somewhere better than Murphy's." That laugh again. Warm, confident, alive. "Saturday night," she said. "Romano's on 3rd, 7 o'clock. 6 months later, I proposed to her in that same diner. She said yes before I'd even finished asking. Our wedding day glowed with September sunshine. Brianna wore her grandmother's lace dress and carried wildflowers we'd picked that morning. When she whispered, "Forever," I believed her. 2 years later, Dustin was born, a red-faced miracle who filled our quiet house with purpose. But as time passed, Brianna's ambition grew, and the life we'd built together began to shift. She wasn't content with enough. She wanted the world. And she got it. When Dustin turned 7, she bought him a computer worth more than my monthly salary. "He needs to understand technology," she said. "The future belongs to kids who think digitally." By the time he was 12, he could talk business better than I could. At 14, he rolled his eyes at family camping trips. "Dad doesn't understand," he'd say. And Brianna would just smile. Our home became a showpiece, a gleaming, silent house filled with people who spoke in profits and projections, and somewhere along the way, we stopped speaking to each other at all. The final fight came after Dustin's graduation. She missed the ceremony because of a business deal. "This has to stop," I told her. "Family should come first." She didn't even look up from her phone. "Don't you dare lecture me about priorities. Everything we have exists because of my work. What about everything we've lost?" I asked quietly. She paused, then said the words that ended us. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending this is working." 6 months later, the divorce was final. She kept the company, the house, the wealth, and Dustin. I got an old house, a modest check, and silence. 15 years passed. Then, out of nowhere, came the call, and now I was standing in the back of a crowded chapel, watching the woman who'd once promised me forever being laid to rest. That's when I heard a voice I'd once known by heart. "Dad?" Dustin stood in the aisle, staring at me like I was a ghost. He looked just like her. Sharp suit, sharp tone, and sharper judgment. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. "You lost the right to show up." "I came to pay my respects," I said. "You embarrassed her enough when she was alive. Don't you dare pretend to grieve her now." 200 heads turned. Every whisper in the chapel froze. Then Dustin turned to the crowd, his voice rising. "This man spent 22 years holding back one of the most brilliant women this town ever produced. He took half her assets and still played the victim. Now he shows up expecting sympathy." The words hit like stones. But for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. "I loved your mother for 40 years, I said quietly. 22 as her husband, 18 as someone who still wished her well. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here to honor the promises we once made." The chapel went silent again. And for the first time since the divorce, my son didn't have a reply. When the service ended, I started to leave. But a man in a dark suit approached me. "Mr. Flores," he said. "Dan Morrison, Welsh and Associates. Could I have a word?" Before I could answer, Dustin appeared beside me, his confidence returning. "Dan," finally. "I assume this is about my mother's estate?" Dan nodded. "Yes, Dustin." "And your father needs to be present as well." "My father?" Dustin scoffed. "Is that necessary?" "Absolutely," the lawyer said. "Your father is specifically named in the will. His presence is required by law." The color drained from Dustin's face, and for the first time that day, it wasn't me standing in silence. It was him. Dan cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Flores was very specific about who should be present for the reading. Both you and Dustin must be there." Something in his tone suggested this wasn't negotiable. Dustin looked annoyed but shrugged with the casual confidence of someone who believed he had nothing to worry about. "Fine, let's get this over with," he said, turning to me with barely concealed impatience. "Try not to make this more difficult than it needs to be." The walk to Dan's office took us 3 blocks through downtown Rock Springs, past buildings that had watched the town's fortunes rise and fall with the energy industry. Dan maintained professional small talk, comments about the weather, the turnout at the service, carefully neutral observations that revealed nothing about what awaited us. His office occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian house. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and the faint scent of polish filled the air. Certificates and diplomas lined the walls, interrupted by photographs of Dan shaking hands with local dignitaries and business leaders. It was exactly the kind of place Brianna would have chosen, prestigious but not ostentatious, successful yet respectful of tradition. "Please, have a seat," Dan said, gesturing toward two leather chairs positioned in front of his mahogany desk. Dustin immediately claimed the chair closest to him, leaving me the one slightly to the side, which somehow felt appropriate. Given my peripheral status in all of this, Dan settled behind his desk, opening a thick file folder and extracting several legal documents with the careful precision of someone who'd performed this ritual countless times. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the quiet room. "Before we begin," Dan said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to express my condolences again. Brianna was not only a valued client, but a dear friend. Her loss is deeply felt by everyone who knew her." Dustin nodded solemnly. I remained silent, unsure what response was appropriate from someone whose relationship with the deceased was so complicated. Dan lifted the top document, several pages bound with a blue backing, and cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Brianna Elizabeth Flores, executed on March 15, 2024, and properly witnessed according to Wyoming state law. This will supersedes all previous wills and codicils. 14 months ago, I wondered what had prompted Brianna to update her will so recently. Had she been sick? Or had something made her contemplate mortality?" Dan continued in a steady professional tone. "The will confirms that Mrs. Flores was of sound mind and disposing memory, and that she was under no undue influence or coercion." Dustin leaned forward slightly, hands clasped together. I could see the anticipation in his posture. A man preparing to claim his inheritance, to step fully into the empire his mother had built. Dan turned to the second page. "I hereby make the following specific bequests and devises," he read. "To my beloved son, Dustin Michael Flores, I leave the family home at 847 Hillcrest Avenue, along with all furnishings, artwork, and personal property contained therein." Dustin smiled, satisfied. The Hillcrest house was worth at least $800,000, a beautiful property with mountain views. "Additionally," Dan continued, "I bequeath to Dustin the sum of $500,000 to be transferred from my primary investment account within 60 days of probate. $500,000 plus the house." I watched Dustin's reaction carefully. He was pleased, but calculating. $500,000 was substantial, yes, but far less than his mother's empire was worth. Where was the rest? "That's wonderful, of course," Dustin said, masking uncertainty with a smile. "But what about Mom's business interests? The company?" Dan set down the first page and lifted the second. "I'm continuing with the specific bequests, Dustin. Please, allow me to finish." I shifted slightly, feeling like an intruder witnessing a private family moment. $500,000 and a home, it was already more than I'd ever seen in my lifetime. "The bequest to Dustin," Dan continued, "includes the following conditions. The inheritance is contingent upon his continued employment with Flores. Consulting solutions for a minimum of 2 years, following the date of this will's execution, or until such time as the company is sold or dissolved." Now Dustin looked genuinely confused. "Conditions? What kind of conditions? And what do you mean until the company is sold? Who would sell it?" "I'm reading the will as written, Dustin," Dan replied evenly. "These are your mother's words, not mine." The tension in the room thickened. Dustin's confident posture shifted. His hands unclenched and reclenched. "Let me get this straight," he said. "I get the house and $500,000, but with strings attached? And you're talking about the company being sold? That doesn't make sense. Mom would never sell the company. It was her life's work." Dan removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. When he looked up again, his gaze moved between us. "Your mother's will contains additional provisions regarding the disposition of her remaining assets," he said. "The company, her investment portfolio, and several other significant holdings." "Well, then let's hear them," Dustin demanded, impatience leaking into his voice. Dan cleared his throat and leaned forward slightly. "Before I continue, I want to emphasize that these documents represent Mrs. Flores's final considered wishes. They were prepared after extensive discussion and consultation. She was adamant about their contents." The room fell silent, save for the faint ticking of an antique clock on Dan's bookshelf. Dustin looked uneasy now. I found myself wondering why Brianna had insisted I be present for this at all. Dan lifted the next page and looked directly at me for the first time since we'd entered the room. However, he said slowly, there are additional provisions that fundamentally alter the distribution of Mrs. Flores's estate. He adjusted his glasses and continued. To my former husband, Jerry Michael Flores, Dan read, I bequeath the sum of $33.5 million to be transferred from my primary investment accounts and securities portfolio. The words hit like an explosion. My mouth fell open. $33.5 million? It didn't seem real. It couldn't possibly apply to me, a retired man sitting in a lawyer's office in Rock Springs, Wyoming. There must be some mistake, I said quietly. Did you say 33 million? Yes, Dan replied. 33.5 million. That is correct. Dustin's face went from white to red in an instant. What did you just say? Dan kept reading, determined to finish. Additionally, I transferred to Jerry Flores controlling interest in Flores Consulting Solutions, including all subsidiary companies, real estate holdings, and business assets. This transfer includes 65% ownership of all corporate entities and appointment as chairman of the board of directors. The room tilted sideways. I couldn't breathe. She was giving me everything. The empire she built. The business that had consumed our marriage. This can't be right, I whispered. There has to be a mistake. I assure you, Mr. Flores, Dan said calmly. There is no error. Mrs. Flores personally reviewed and confirmed every word. Dustin shot to his feet so violently his chair hit the wall. This is impossible. She couldn't. He turned to me, trembling with rage. What did you do? How did you manipulate her? I didn't do anything, I said weakly. I haven't spoken to your mother in 15 years. Liar, he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. People don't give away $33 million to their ex-husbands. You must have gotten to her somehow, when she was sick, when she wasn't thinking clearly. Dan's calm but firm voice cut through the chaos. Mrs. Flores was of completely sound mind when she executed this will. She underwent a thorough mental competency evaluation to prevent future challenges. I sat frozen, the numbers spinning in my head. 33.5 million, and the company. Why? Dan closed the folder softly. Mrs. Flores left specific instructions for that question, he said. She asked me to share a personal message with you after reading these provisions. Dustin's face twisted. A personal message? She left him a personal message, but cut me out of everything. Dan remained calm. You received a substantial inheritance, Dustin. $500,000 and a valuable home. Compared to that? Dustin snapped, pointing at me. You're talking about hundreds of millions. The company alone? Dan raised his hand for silence. Enough! Before this goes any further, Mrs. Flores wanted you both to hear her words. He opened a manila envelope labeled personal message, in Brianna's familiar handwriting. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Dan began to read. My dearest Jerry, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably sitting in Dan's office wondering if the entire world has lost its mind. I can picture your face right now, confused but trying to be polite about it. Despite myself, I smiled faintly. That was exactly what I was doing. I know this inheritance comes as a shock. You probably think there's been a mistake, that you don't deserve this. But you do, Jerry. You deserve every penny, and I'm going to tell you why. I never stopped loving you. Not during our worst fights, not during the divorce, not during 15 years of silence. I was angry at you for not understanding my ambition, but angrier at myself for choosing ambition over love. Tears blurred my vision. Dan's voice faltered for a moment, then continued. Dustin, the letter read, my beautiful, brilliant boy. I know you're furious right now, convinced your father manipulated me. But, sweetheart, you're not ready for this inheritance. Not yet. You've lived your whole life in the shadow of success. You've never had to build something from nothing. You've never learned that wealth without empathy is just emptiness. Jerry taught me about integrity, about the kind of strength that doesn't need to crush others to feel powerful. I forgot those lessons, but I never forgot him. I was crying openly now. Her words weren't just love, they were forgiveness. Dustin, I hope you learn what your father already knows, that people matter more than profit. Jerry, you're inheriting more than money. You're inheriting a second chance to use what I built for good. I trust you, because you never wanted this. When Dan finished, the room was utterly silent. I held her letter against my chest, feeling both the weight and mercy of her words. Dustin sat motionless, his world collapsing around him. Finally, he whispered, "This isn't over." I looked at him gently. "It is," I said. "The moment your mother made her choice, it was over." As I stepped out into the afternoon light, I realized something. Brianna hadn't given me money. She'd given me redemption. Justice, I realized, wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about recognition. That character outlasts ambition. That patience outlasts pride. And that love, real love, never truly dies. Voiceover. Outro. If you liked this story, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tell us your thoughts in the comments below. To listen to the next story, click the box on your screen. Thank you for watching.